and participants are joining. Welcome, friends. We'll be starting in just a couple of minutes as you all begin to join the rooms. I'm going to be simultaneously broadcasting this from our Facebook page. Welcome, friends. We're still waiting on some more participants to join. We will be starting shortly, but please enjoy our smiling or somber faces as you join. Welcome, friends. On behalf of the Milwaukee Turners Confronting Mass Incarceration Committee, we're going to begin in just another minute or two as folks are joining. Okay, and we are about to begin. So welcome on behalf of the Milwaukee Turners. Warm Milwaukee Turner welcome, my friends. My name is Emilio Torre. I'm the Executive Director of the Milwaukee Turners. On behalf of Julie Lee Kohler, head of our Confronting Mass Incarceration Committee and the Milwaukee Turners, now numbering close to 300 members, we welcome you to Criminal Legal Systems and Violence, Restorative Justice, and Circle Keeping as a Road to Repair. We'll be sharing the bit.ly so that you're welcome to join us for the other 3 webinars that we'll have every Thursday during the month of February. This is just the first of 4 webinars examining this topic. To start, I'd like to thank and welcome our partners, the Wisconsin Decarceration Platform, Wisconsin Justice Initiative, the Milwaukee School of Engineering, Community Advocates Public Policy Institute, UWM Institute for Systems Change and Peace Building, Restorative Circles LLC, Project Return, Marquette University Center for Urban Research, Teaching and Outreach, MATC, Milwaukee Mental Health Task Force, the ACLU of Wisconsin, the City of Milwaukee Office of Violence Prevention, the Community Warehouse, Wisconsin Department of Corrections, and Boswell Books. To begin, there is an epidemic of violence in our culture, and after many years of exploring this issue, the Milwaukee Turners would like to present how restorative justice and circle keeping may provide an essential part of the solution to repairing this. Violence is everywhere, in the courts, throughout the criminal legal system, in reentry, diversion, and of course in the community itself. We're brought up on violence. Many of us crave violence in entertainment, and we seem to accept and encourage violence from the playground all the way to the presidency. And so today we bring you in courts and prisons, how do we address violent crime? And with us to start this panel is our featured speaker, Professor Michael O'Hare from Marquette Law School, who will discuss sentencing and options available for people who are accused of committing violent crimes. Many of the policies we have are based on fear of recidivism, and we want to explore what options there are for people. Professor O'Hare is also an author, and I've learned that his book, Wisconsin Sentencing in the Tough on Crime Era, is now available on paperback. And it's going to examine how judges retain power and why mass incarceration happened anyway. It'll focus on the dramatic increase in the US prison population since the 1970s, and since that's often blamed on mandatory sentencing required by 3 strikes laws and other punitive crime bills. Professor O'Hare demonstrates how political dynamics can lead judges to impose harsher sentences. He is also going to share with us this afternoon some important things we know about violent crimes or violent criminals that may actually undercut beliefs on why trying to work with violent people is a waste of time. We encourage you to go to Boswell Books at boswellbooks.com to order your copy today. Our distinguished panelists, each of whom will be introduced prior to their speaking, include the Wisconsin Department of Corrections Secretary Kevin Carr, Adam Clausen, who's a training specialist at Hope for Prisoners in Las Vegas, and he's also joined by John Ponder. Sylvania S.B. Crosley, restorative justice practitioner, and Karen Holmes, volunteer services coordinator from the Vermont Department of Corrections. Again, I'm your moderator, Emilio Torre, and I am the executive director of the Milwaukee Turners here at Turner Hall. I'm also joined by our co-moderator, Associate Professor Mike Carriere from Milwaukee School of Engineering. Please, we welcome questions and in the chat feature here on Zoom or on our different Facebook channels. And we have some volunteers who will be helping curate that along with Mike Carriere. We have Tamika Vukovic, Molly Collins, and Chrissy Fung. So before we jump over to Professor O'Hare, a brief introduction. Professor O'Hare is a recognized national authority on criminal punishment. He teaches criminal law and related courses at Marquette University. Professor O'Hare graduated from Yale College and Yale Law School, where he was editor-in-chief of the Yale Journal of Law and the Humanities and editor on the Yale Law Journal. Following law school, he clerked for the U.S. District Court Judge Janet Bond Arterton in New Haven, Connecticut, and then practiced civil and criminal litigation in Chicago. He's been at Marquette Law School since 2000, and he was also a member of the Fire and Police Commission from 2010 to 2016, and that, I believe, is where I first met Professor O'Hare. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our distinguished speaker.
Thank you very much, Emilio, and thank you to everyone participating in this webinar. We've got a really exciting, terrific set of panelists coming up, and I am really looking forward to hearing what they have to say. I kind of look at my job here primarily as to create a framework or a platform for some of the the observations and experiences that they will share with us. More specifically, I'm framing my remarks as 6 points that I wish were more widely known or better appreciated about violent crime and legal responses to violent crime. Let me see if I can do screen sharing now. Let's see. All right. And I'll start that. Okay. Is that coming through for everybody? Looking good, Emilio? Okay, very good. All right, so I said six points. So this is the first one. Violent crime is a complex social phenomenon, and corrections and courts only have limited control over rates of violent crime. To put it differently, we've got a lot of concern about a contemporary violent crime wave, but it's important for us to bear in mind that based on past experience, it's awfully hard to incarcerate your way out of a crime wave. Now, there's a lot of data that could be shared to make this point. I'll just give you a little bit of a taste of it. You see on the screen here, for instance, the rates of violent crime and imprisonment in Wisconsin. This is over a pretty extensive period of time dating back to 1960. So you see the 2 lines there. The blue line is the violent crime rate in our state. The orange line is the rate of imprisonment. And you can see there's not exactly a tight linear relationship between these 2 lines. Some years the lines move in tandem, other years they move in diametrically opposite directions. Some years one line is pretty stable and the other is moving sharply up or down. So that's certainly not suggestive of any ability to control violent crime rates very directly through rates of imprisonment. And we might note in particular, just looking back over the past quarter century or so, imprisonment rates have been at absolute all-time highs in Wisconsin, and violent crime rates have also been up and down quite a bit, but generally at relatively high levels as well. So not much indication there that record-setting levels of imprisonment in Wisconsin have had a big impact on reducing crime. The national data is presented here, and you can see while the shapes of the curves are a bit different nationally, you still would struggle to find any consistent relationship between these 2 lines. Okay, second point. Sentences in these violent crime cases are playing a leading role in driving mass incarceration. So previous slide showed nationally and in Wisconsin, we're at awfully high levels of imprisonment right now by historical standards. And there is a common misperception that it's the war on drugs that's driven mass incarceration. That has certainly played a role, but even more important than the war on drugs has been legal responses to violent crime, and sentences, average sentences in violent crime cases have been going up quite sharply over the past 3 decades or so. So just some indication of the importance of violent crime in relation to imprisonment. The first pie chart on the left gives you admissions to Wisconsin state prisons in 2019 and 2020. This is excluding, by the way, revocations, which are fascinating and important issue in their own right. But putting revocations to one side, you can see an awful lot of these admissions are coming from the big 4 categories of violent crime: assaults and batteries, sexual offenses, robberies, and homicides. So that's counting for almost half of our prison admissions. And then the pie chart on the right is showing, as of July of last year, the breakdown in prisoners in Wisconsin institutions. And you can see in this point in time representation that the violent crime categories are accounting for an even larger share of the overall pie. And when you see that large share, about 2/3 coming from violent crimes, that's indicating that the sentence lengths for these offenses are especially long. So people go in on the violent crimes and they tend to stay in for much longer than people convicted of other offenses. You might particularly note how relatively slim the homicide pie wedge is for prison admissions on the left, and how much dramatically larger it is for the prison population on the right. That's showing really very, very long sentences in homicide cases. Okay, third point, the risk posed by people of violent crimes is not categorically or inherently different than the recidivism risk posed by other offenders. And really importantly for both groups, most recidivism is nonviolent in character. So the most important data set that's used for national researchers in studying recidivism is this data about individuals released from prisons in 30 different states. Those individuals have been tracked by the U.S. Department of Justice for many years. And on the far left, you can see the overall rearrest rates broken out by all the released prisoners, and then those convicted of violent crimes. The rearrest rates are quite high. That's a rather disheartening figure to see that close to 80% of the released prisoners are being rearrested within 5 years. Interestingly, those convicted of violent crimes have a slightly lower rearrest rate, slightly lower recidivism rate by that measure, although still quite high at about 70%. But it's important not only to look at that crude overall rearrest figure, but also to figure out what kinds of offenses are being committed. And you can see that for both the people convicted of violent offenses and more generally, by far the most common recidivism offenses are public order offenses. This is kind of a broad miscellaneous category, but would include things like disorderly conduct, violating conditions of release, driving while intoxicated, illegal possession of a firearm, things like that. And then the drug offenses are also a major category of recidivism. I have not broken down the drug offenses by type of drug offense, but you'll have to take my word for it that the overwhelming majority of those drug offenses are simple possession. It's not drug trafficking, it's simple possession, which is, in the grand scheme of things, a relatively minor offense, as are, again, many of those public order offenses. The recidivism that everybody, rightly so, is most concerned about is rape and murder. Those are represented all the way in the extreme right of the graph, and you can see that those are extremely uncommon recidivism events. And the other thing that I'd invite you to observe here is that the patterns of recidivism by offense type are pretty similar for both the violent and the nonviolent offenders. So you don't see any indication here of a categorical difference in the type or degree of risk posed by violent offenders. Fourth point, desistance from crime is the norm. People tend to age out of crime. You've maybe heard the old saying, crime is a young person's game. And the data very much bear that out. People naturally grow up and move beyond the crime committing phase of their life. And the data tells us that this is true even for the highest risk offenders. And there's actually been about 2 centuries of research that's been done to demonstrate this desistance point that's been done all across the world, and this is an extremely consistent finding. Just to give you the results of one representative study, this was a study that tracked a group of young men from a disadvantaged neighborhood in Boston from the ages of 7 to 70. So an extremely ambitious study of offending patterns for this group. The researchers found 6 different distinct patterns of offending. You can see that for almost all of these individuals, offending peaks in the teen years or the early 20s and drops off pretty steadily after that. The one group of greatest concern is what the researchers called the high-rate chronic offenders, who continue accelerating their offending through the 30s, through their 30s. But two things to note about even this group, actually three things to note about even this group, the high-rate chronic offenders. Number one, they are very few in number. They constitute only about 3% of this overall offender group. Number two, even they begin to desist pretty markedly after age 40. And number three, the high-rate chronic offenders tend to be property exclusive offenders. So the violent offenders are almost all found in the earlier desisting groups. Okay, next point. People who are convicted of violent crimes are not inherently more resistant to rehabilitation than are other offenders. The science of rehabilitation has advanced dramatically over the past 3 decades. For a while in the late 20th century, the conventional wisdom was nothing works. There's nothing that we can do with offenders other than just be patient, recognizing that, you know, eventually they will age out of their crime committing. But that is no longer the conventional wisdom. There's a huge amount of research now that demonstrates that good programs have the capacity of hastening desistance from crime. Now, not all programs do. That's not what I'm saying. There are plenty, unfortunately, plenty of ineffective rehabilitative programs that are out there. But we understand now the key principles that need to guide the design and implementation of a rehabilitative program, and the research is very clear that a well-designed, well-run program will reliably reduce recidivism rates by about 25 to 50%. And there is no distinction between offender groups. In other words, this research has been done with a wide variety of programs that have been used with many different offender groups, and consistently supports this finding that recidivism rates can be reduced through good programming. In fact, there's even emerging evidence that recidivism rates can be reduced for psychopathic offenders, which is interesting because for a long time that was regarded almost as the definition of this disorder of psychopathy, that these individuals could not be rehabilitated. But we're finding even with this group that good programming reduces recidivism rates. And then finally, something that's been a particular focus of my research in recent years, I think it's important for people to realize as they think about potential rehabilitation and reintegration of individuals who've been convicted of violent crimes. It's important to be aware that these individuals are facing a growing network of collateral consequences imposed by law that interfere with their successful reintegration into society, and may slow down or obstruct that natural desistance process. Collateral consequences that tend to isolate individuals from mainstream society. So just to give you a little bit of a taste of this, with the help of some research assistants 4 years ago, I undertook a comprehensive survey of special legal disadvantages or disabilities that are imposed in all 50 states for individuals who have been convicted of a crime that is defined as in law as a violent crime. We found about 600 special rules and restrictions found across all 50 states. You know, and just to give you a sense of some of these, employment eligibility is cut off for employment in certain fields. In many states, there are laws that prohibit discrimination against individuals based on a criminal conviction, but in some states, people with violent crime convictions are specifically carved out from that law. So in other words, it's legal to discriminate against people based on a violent crime conviction. Many states have expungement laws that allow people to clear their records after they've been crime-free for a period of time, but many of these laws carve out violent crime convictions. People are probably familiar with the idea of sex offender registration and community notification laws, which have been demonstrated to be a significant impediment to rehabilitation and reintegration of sex offenders. Unfortunately, these laws in some states have now been extended to people convicted of violent crimes. In some states, people with violent crime convictions are prohibited from adopting or fostering children. In some states, people with violent crime convictions are prohibited from receiving state-supported legal aid, civil legal assistance. In states that have parole release systems or systems for prisoners to earn good time credits towards early release based on good behavior, violent offenders in almost all states have reduced eligibility or no eligibility whatsoever. Community supervision rules in some states are by law categorically different and harsher for people convicted of violent crimes. People with violent crime convictions or charges are often categorically prohibited from entry into pretrial diversion programs in some states, which often include rehabilitative programming components. Importantly, many of these laws make no distinction between felony and misdemeanor level convictions. So a relatively minor misdemeanor assault could have the same legal effect as much more serious violent felonies. Many of these laws make no distinction between adult court convictions and juvenile court adjudications. And very few of these laws include any sunset provision or expiration date. So in other words, a barroom fight that somebody got into in their early 20s, or a misguided robbery attempt, at age 18, that can be affecting people's lives in important ways 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the line, no matter how clearly they have demonstrated their rehabilitation. Okay, so those are the points that I wanted to make that I hope will set the stage for the other speakers. And thank you for your attention, and I look forward to hearing what the other panelists have to say.
Thank you very much, Professor O'Hara. That was fascinating. Before I introduce our next panelist, I'd like to encourage all of those joining us on Facebook and also in the webinar here to type any questions you have in the chat on the side so that we can curate this at the end after the panelists have had a chance to talk. So our next panelist is Secretary Kevin Carr from the Wisconsin Department of Corrections. Kevin previously worked as a U.S. Marshal in the Eastern District of Wisconsin, was appointed to that position by President Barack Obama. Previously, he spent 30 years working in the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office, where he held numerous positions. As inspector there, Secretary Carr served as the second in charge of daily operations for the agency, and he was instrumental in the creation of the Milwaukee County Criminal Justice Council. He holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice management and an associate's degree in criminal justice from Concordia University, and he has received postgraduate certificates from Harvard University, the FBI National Academy, and Northwestern University. We're hoping that Secretary Carr, you could tell us a couple of things today, a bit about the current state of affairs in the criminal legal system, especially as it pertains to what programs exist for incarcerated people now and what is available for them upon reentry.
Okay, well, thank you, Emilio, and thank you all for having me here today. I'll be brief in my remarks. First of all, from a very high level, I would just state for background that when I took this position in 2019, I did so with the belief that from the moment that a person walks through the doors of any of our facilities at the Department of Correction, that we have an obligation to provide those individuals with all the programming, treatment, and support that they need in order for them to eventually successfully re-enter our communities. You know, I was having a law enforcement background. I was a little surprised to find when I came to corrections that there were extended periods of time where those in our care did not receive any programming or access to programming at all. And we're moving in the direction of trying to rectify that on many levels. Now, what sort of programming do we currently offer at the Department of Corrections for those who are in custody? Of course, we have, you know, anger management, substance use disorder programs, cognitive behavioral programming, domestic violence, sex offender treatment, and employment programming. One of the areas that we are doing a lot more work in is providing more educational opportunities for those in our care. Recently, we've expanded our partnership with the Milwaukee Area Technical College, and I'm proud to say for the first time in our system's history, just on January 15th of this year, we graduated 14 persons in our care from around the system from MATC's 2-year online associate's degree program. So those are programs and opportunities for growth and change that I think are extremely valuable for those in our care. If we wanted to also talk about other educational opportunities, of course, we provide basic HSED program and GED programming, adult basic education, career and technical education, so that we can provide people with skills for employment upon release to the community, English as a second language, and special education services as needed. If we just switch gears to, you know, what we do upon reentry, of course, as if people are on extended supervision, they've already been subjected to our assessment process, where we determine risk and needs for every person in our care. And those risk and needs assessments are conveyed to the supervising personnel for our clients. And those needs we attempt to meet those needs as best we can in the community, based on a lot of changes that we just made in community supervision that just went into effect January 11th. I could spend an enormous amount of time going through what those changes are, but one of the things that Professor O'Hare mentioned, you know, were the number of rules that apply to people who are on supervision. We just made a conscious decision to reduce the number of standard rules and special rules applying to folks in custody, and we try to move in the direction of assuring that there was a direct nexus to the rules of supervision for individual clients and the conduct that they were on supervision for, which I think is helping move us in the right direction. But some of the things that we do provide to folks who are re-entering our community, we have a special program that I am very proud of called Opening Avenues to Reentry Success, or the OARS program, which focuses on folks who are in our care that have mental health issues. And we provide wraparound services for those individuals upon release, including counseling and therapy, housing assistance, and work placement. And we intensely supervise those folks on that program. That program exists in about 56 counties out of the 72 in Wisconsin. During the last budget, we tried to expand it to all 72 counties, and I'm going to take another stab at it this year to try to get that program expanded to all 72 counties. The rate of success of those who participate in that program is extremely high. I can't tell you the exact number off the top of my head, but I know it's a very successful program here at DOC, and I want to do a lot more of that. Windows to Work is another program that we offer for those who are incarcerated and on supervision to try to provide those individuals with job counseling and placement and the skills necessary to get employment in the community once they are released. Vocational training academies, I've talked a little bit about that, where we partner with local technical colleges to provide our folks with certifications that they can carry with them into the community for employment opportunities. And we do a lot of that by recently employing mobile laboratories at our facilities. These are these great big long mobile trailers that cost about $500,000 each that we use to provide technical training along with partnership from the local technical colleges in areas of welding and CNC operation and things of that nature. And that's just a thumbnail of some of the things that we're doing in the area of reentry. I think I've taken up about more than my share of time, so I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Secretary Carr. We have an incredible number of questions while Professor O'Hare and Secretary Carr were speaking, and we're struggling to save them all. Maybe 55, 60 questions so far. But we're going to ask questions towards the end as we're syncing through them. What I'd like to do now is I would like to introduce our next speaker, who is Adam Clausen. Briefly, originally Adam is actually from a small farm, Wisconsin, and he's talking to us from Nevada, where he's a training specialist at Hope for Prisoners in Las Vegas. And I see that he's with the famous John Ponder. And Adam, you have a fascinating story about how you got started and why you're able to do what you're currently doing now. I'm hoping that you could share some of that with us, especially in the context of what Professor O'Hare and Secretary Carr have been discussing with us.
Thank you, Emilio. I'm truly grateful to be here, to be able to speak to all of you today, because I am classified, or was classified, as a repeat violent offender. And as such, after committing a string of robberies in early 2000, I was sentenced to 213 years in federal prison. And I spent the next 20 years, 5 months working on earning another chance to somehow achieve another opportunity to rejoin society. My story really revolves around what we were able to accomplish, an incarcerated community, life coaches. And those coaches helped to radically transform an entire prison culture. And doing so, it changed the trajectory of countless lives and really reshaped.
This is my program that I've been working.
Really reshaped the thinking of prison administrators, of executives throughout the entire chain of command, all the way up to Washington, D.C., within the Bureau of Prisons. So for me, my story revolves around that experience. It was the support. It was the community that was created, that pro-social environment, and the programs were all peer-led. Obviously, we needed the support of prison administrators, of staff members, and of outside supporters, such as Mr. John Ponder, because it was in, I believe, 2015, when we had our first annual reentry summit to promote what we were doing on the inside, when Mr. Ponder said that he would come and speak because he was so captivated by what we were doing on the inside, the success that we were having. And he wanted to hear more about it, to be a part of it, to support it. His support opened the door to numerous other Department of Justice officials, universities, others who came into that environment and got a chance to experience. And most of them could not put a finger on exactly what was happening, but they knew that it was something special. They knew that it was something that needed to be replicated. Obviously, working within corrections, there are plenty of challenges. It's always about safety and security. The reason why prison administrators got behind that programming was because they saw the value. They saw the increased safety and security of staff, of the population, an overall improved sense of well-being. And ultimately, there was a reduction in incidents inside the prison. The entire culture was radically transformed. Those individuals who were there at that time have gone on to lead incredibly successful and productive lives. Because of that support, because of that culture, being totally immersed in that, that's the reason I'm here today. And it's because of individuals like Mr. Ponder, different Department of Justice officials, and ultimately the judge that granted my compassionate release and reduced my sentence to time served. I am fully committed at this stage to making sure that the opportunities that were afforded to me, as unique as they were, that they be made available to others, because I know the power, I know the potential impact. Mr. Ponder and I have spoken for years about creating that continuum of services, which is why I was so inspired to hear Secretary Carr's remarks on the programming that's taking place, the innovations, to create that continuum of services that begins on the inside and smoothly transitions individuals coming out. That's absolutely essential. That's what we need. That's why I came out here to Las Vegas. As soon as I was released, I came out here because I needed to be a part of Hope for Prisoners in Las Vegas and to continue the work that I did inside, now working with Mr. Ponder out here in the community. I believe this is my life's purpose. I am fully committed to helping replicate that rare opportunity that was granted to me on the inside to make sure that other individuals receive that same support, that same sense of community. Because whether they are classified as violent, nonviolent, whatever that classification is, we take that humanistic approach. We all need the same things. It's the same services. 30 years have shown us doing things in one particular way has not worked. The rate of recidivism has not budged. We need to do things differently. I'm grateful to be here with all of you today to share in some of those experiences, to hear some of those next steps, what we can do going forward to improve those outcomes. Thank you. I think Emilio might be currently preoccupied. Emilio, I'm going to send that back to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that was fantastic. So we are going to now swap over, and I apologize. We're experiencing technical difficulties. I'm in the 150 plus year old Turner Hall building, and there's always something happening. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to introduce our next speaker, SP Crosley, who is also has a fascinating story. And SB is actually speaking to us from Milwaukee. Sylvania Crosley, aka SB, has an incredibly powerful story connected directly to restorative justice. SB is in Partners in Hope here, and he's joining us from the community warehouse. And I understand, SB, that you also gave the keynote speech at your program's commencement. We're hoping that you could share with us some of your experiences as it pertains specifically to restorative justice, incarceration, and how we go about rebuilding our lives in the context of what the others have been discussing.
Well, first, I would like to thank everybody for inviting me. My story is similar to Adam's in respect to incarceration. I was incarcerated at the age of 17 and wasn't released until I was 61 years old in the Wisconsin correctional system. Throughout the course of that incarceration, there wasn't many opportunities available for rehabilitation or for a person to change their life direction. However, throughout that course, there came some progressive thinking administrators. And in so doing, the old way of doing things had to change. And they began to implement different types of programs, self-help, the diversity enhancement programs, cognitive thinking programs, some as the professor, Secretary Carr spoke on into the institution. And when they implemented those programs, the individuals that did take them, you could see a change in their attitude, in their behavior. But as the years went on, those programs became very restrictive, as the professor was saying. Individuals who were incarcerated for very violent offenses, serious offenses, were denied the opportunity to participate in those programs for whatever reasons. Maybe it was, the thinking at that time that it wouldn't benefit them. So as the years went on, these doors began to open, and individuals such as myself were allowed to take these different types of cognitive thinking programs. And in so doing, we begin to see ourselves differently. We begin to see, I will say here, victims. I won't say victims, I'll say survivors, because that is what the participants and the people whom I met through restorative justice call themselves, survivors. So that's the lesson I take away from that. I think in many respects, 6 out of 10 of the people that commit violent crimes, we don't particularly see our survivors as human. So we're able to inflict whatever type of damage it is that we may have caused upon them. And I think restorative justice changes that person. You begin to see who it is that you have victimized. If it wasn't that particular individual, you'll be able to talk with and sit and exchange with victims who have lost loved ones due to murder, victims who have been raped or robbed. And you can connect on a human basis with that person. That is what I think restorative justice offers to individuals incarcerated that the criminal justice systems and the penal system itself don't offer. It don't give you that. And until the system itself changes and begin to see the individuals in prison as human, then they in turn will treat them as such. And that's one of the biggest things that we find with prisons, is that those inside are not viewed as human. So the things in which we can be given and should be given isn't given, because at some point, many of us will come back out into society. And if we come back out here with the same mindset that we went in with, recidivism going to continue to go. So administrators have to change, programming has to be implemented. There's a number of things within the criminal justice system, as everyone is aware of, has to change in order for corrections to be corrected. And with that, I'll pass it over.
Thank you, SB. Now I'd like to switch over to our final panelist, who is actually speaking to us from their home in Vermont. And Karen Holmes is with the Vermont Department of Corrections and is the Volunteer Services Coordinator there. where she works with a really unique program called Circles of Support and Accountability, whose abbreviation is Cosa. And Cosa is a volunteer-driven and community-based model for enhancing community safety through supporting high-risk offenders that are returning home to their communities after a period of incarceration, while holding them accountable to pro-social community expectations. And you work with an all too unique program, and we're hoping that you could share some of your experiences and practices with us, especially in the context of what we've learned from the 4 previous speakers who've addressed some of what's highlighted here. So over to you, Karen.
Thank you. Really excited to be here, and I feel like the folks who spoke before me really teed me up perfectly to serve you all this really beautiful program that we have spent years cultivating in Vermont. The COSA program started in Vermont initially in 2006. We received a SAVORI grant, the Serious and Violent Offender Reentry Initiative, and that was a planning grant that wasn't connected to any particular outcome. So we had some freedom through Department of Corrections to explore different opportunities. We already had a network of community justice centers throughout the state of Vermont that were practicing restorative justice in the community. So some really great visionaries in the department at that time reached out to the Community Justice Center and said, hey, we've got this money to plan for something. What do you think we should look at? And that's when the idea to look at a Canadian model called COSA was initiated. And from there, we received some Second Chance Act funding that was designated to implement the COSA program on a small scale at a few community justice centers throughout the state. And it proved to be a really wonderful program that we then turned into more funding and more support, so that now we have it throughout the entire state. So anybody who is releasing from a prison in the state of Vermont, regardless of where they're going to, could have the opportunity to participate in a COSA. So sort of the anatomy of a COSA, it's comprised of 3 to 5 volunteers from within the community, and a reentry coordinator who's the paid professional from the CJC, and the core member is how we refer to the person who's coming out of incarceration. It's an entirely voluntary program, both on the part of the core member and the volunteers who are there to support that person. And that's actually one of the key ingredients in the success of COSA, and something, so I just back up a second. I'm now working for Department of Corrections, but previous to this position, I worked as a reentry coordinator in the state for a couple of years. So I've had the experience sort of in both settings. And one of the things that core members often remarked, we'd find ourselves 6 months into a 1-year COSA group, and something would come up that, to remind them that the team members were there as volunteers. And so often that was just so far outside somebody's comprehension that this group of people would agree to meet with them for free every week for a year, that they just sort of put it out of their mind and just assumed that, no, that can't be right, I've misunderstood, they're being paid, or there's some other reason that they're here. So that reminder and that eventual recognition and understanding that people were really there because they care about this core member, they care about his or her safety as much as their community safety, is a really important element of the COSA. So back to sort of the anatomy. We have like I said, the core member, the reentry coordinator, and the 3 to 5 volunteers who are meeting weekly. Sometimes it's in a formal, semi-formal group setting, could be a circle process, and it could be that the group has decided to go out bowling for the afternoon. So there's a whole range of ways that the weekly meeting could go, but the overarching goal is, well, it's 3-pronged. So no more victims, no more secrets, and no one is disposable. So starting with that really core belief that no one is disposable, we're looking into the prisons for folks who have high risk and high needs. It's a program that started out initially for sex offenders, which is a group that is most likely to be alienated and ostracized by the communities upon their return. So the idea that we have this radical inclusion or radical hospitality where we're inviting people back into the community and connecting them with a new group of folks who are interested, like I said, in both the safety of the core member and the safety of the community. And part of what's helping to make the COSA program work is allowing for a new narrative for the core member, which isn't necessarily about discarding their past life, but finding out areas, assets, and strengths, and highlighting and revealing those assets and strengths to help this person build a new story for their path forward. So for them to be able to see themselves, you know, even through past experiences, I'm a loyal friend, or I'm a hard worker, different elements that we can highlight and bring forward through the COSA circle that they can capitalize on and use in the story of their future has been a really important element of how the COSA operates. So we've done some studies in the state of Vermont. Now that we've been doing this, this year we initiated our 600th COSA in the state of Vermont. They're not all happening simultaneously, but since the beginning of the COSA program, we've now initiated 600 COSAs in the state. So we've been able to do some research. And I was just saying with Emilio when I talked to him yesterday, some of my other peers and colleagues are very well versed in the data. So that data exists for all you folks out there who really like to dig into the numbers, and the numbers support the story. But myself, I'm very much interested in the story of COSA and how the human connection has been built and forged in a way that has created more safety within our communities. So Vermont is a little bit unique. I mean, we like to think of ourselves as unique in a lot of ways, but part of what allows us to be this progressive, I think, in a lot of ways is the size of our state. So we're only a population of just over 600,000 for the whole state. Most of our towns, the vast majority of our municipalities have populations 3,000 people or under. So that creates a different sense of community. You know the people in your town. When you walk down the street, very few of us are anonymous. And that has been one of the building blocks of COSA is, you know, when somebody returns to a community, and in Vermont, we prefer that people return to the community or the region that they came from before they were incarcerated. You naturally feel like everybody knows what you've done, the worst of the worst, and it's really difficult to integrate in a meaningful way back into those communities. But to be surrounded by a group of people who has shown and agreed to you know, certain values that's, you know, non-judgment, and like I said, that no one is disposable, and to volunteer their time to work with these folks for a year and to show up in the community with them has been incredibly meaningful for people's process of change. Let's see, what else should I touch on? There's so many things about COSA that make it such a really incredible program that it's hard to really capture it in a 5 or 10 minute presentation. So I think there'll be a lot of questions that I'd be happy to answer, and also happy to answer after in the days and weeks ahead. We do have a unique system in Vermont also when it comes to the structure of our department and how we operate together. So we have a unified system with corrections and probation and parole under the same agency. The community justice centers are grant funded through Department of Corrections. So that also creates, you know, where there's a chasm usually between Department of Corrections and the community justice centers have been able to create a bridge that allows a window back into corrections for community members. So there may be, in a lot of cases, you know, some really vast differences in the ways that the community believes corrections is operating or isn't operating. So to restore some of that humanity and transparency between the community and the Department of Corrections has been really helpful. It allows corrections to see also the core members in through a different light, not just through the lens of are they or aren't they following their conditions of release, but oh, I see that, you know, their humanity is really being shown through in these circles of support and accountability. So I have a lot of really great things to say about the program, and I'm happy to be here and answer more.
Thank you so much. And when you say answering questions, we've surpassed 100 questions, and so we're Professor Mike Carriere and I are sorting them out with our other friends. And what we'll probably do is also share this body of questions with all of you. There's no way we can get to all of them. Some, although very important, are pertaining to different topics. Some of these questions also will be answered in future, the subsequent 3 webinars that we have, and we'll talk about some of that. But I want to ask some of the common questions we've had, and any of the panelists are welcome to answer these. I'd like to begin with what you all believe makes an effective rehabilitative program, whether that is through the context of restorative justice, circles of support, or models that are more aligned with what Adam was discussing earlier. And you can just unmute yourselves and answer that when you feel you want to step up.
I'd be happy to begin with a quick response on that. One of my core beliefs, who are closest to the problem are generally closest to the solution. So any programming, any initiative going forward needs to include, as one of those primary stakeholders, those who are going to be the recipients. Individuals such as myself and SB who have that lived experience. Since I've been out of prison, I've heard numerous offers or numerous interests in getting that lived experience in developing different models and systems. But I have not seen that genuinely put into action yet. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity here for Secretary Carr and for anyone else who is in a position to drive that going forward, to be innovative, to do something different, because, you know, I mean, the status quo has not worked. So what is there, you know, to lose, but everything to be gained?
I will concur. In order for there to be any effective return back into society, those such as ourselves have to be involved in the direction in which it goes, because we know what our needs are more than anyone else. When you combine those incarcerated and those in society together, we could reach a common understanding and goal as to how to make it safe for everyone. The program in which I'm involved with here in Milwaukee, Partners in Hope, I believe is a springboard from the programs in Las Vegas. It offers guys something when they come out. Many times we don't want to accept help where there is help at, especially if we see that help coming from an adversary, in particular DOC, the Department of Correction. When it comes from outside in, it's more acceptable to those individuals because we see it as someone willing to help us become better or different persons than we was.
Thank you, and in part you've answered it. Another question I'm going to ask in the future, but I'm very curious also to hear from Secretary Carr, Professor O'Hare, and Ms. Holmes about how more institutionally do we measure the effectiveness of these types of programs we say are rehabilitating or assisting people convicted of violent crimes.
Yeah, Emilio, as far as measuring the effectiveness of reentry programs and rehabilitation programs, to me, it's a moving target. A lot of it depends on the definitions that are used to determine what is recidivism, okay, and how is that measured. That makes a big difference in determining effectiveness. If you want to use data and a more scientific approach. Something that is more intuitive, however, in my opinion, is, does it meet the needs of the individuals who are being served? Does it meet the needs of the individual, who is participating in the program, and the community, in order to achieve, I think, the common goal of public safety and successful reintegration into our communities. So, I think, you can look at a whole lot of data that might talk about recidivism rates and what have you, but the real measurement of success for me is, are the people that are participating in that program actually succeeding? Are they actually thriving and living a crime-free life, supporting their families, contributing to their communities, and on the right path? That, to me, is more important than some of the numbers that we conveniently use to measure success.
I can just say a couple things about this. I mean, there's a huge amount I could say. This is a tremendously important and complicated topic. But one thing I'll say is that assessment is very important. The research shows that some programs work, other programs don't work, and you can't assume in this area that good intentions are enough. There are plenty of well-intentioned programs that have significant flaws in their design or implementation and are not effective in achieving their goals. So assessment is important. The gold standard for assessment that unfortunately is not done very often in the criminal justice realm at all, the gold standard is randomized assignment trials where offenders would be randomly placed in a program or not, and you'd have some rigorous basis for making comparisons on outcomes. But unfortunately, again, that's not the norm in the criminal justice area. One final point I'd make about programs is that one thing the research does indicate is that programs that are centered on blaming and shaming tend not to be effective. Blaming and shaming programs tend to reinforce antisocial outsider identities among offenders, and they do not help offenders to imagine themselves living law-abiding lives, productive lives, pro-social lives. So, while there's kind of a fine line to walk, because accountability is important, and it's necessary to to make sure that people who have done seriously harmful things are recognizing that what they've done is wrong. But on the other hand, to frame it as blaming and shaming is apt to be counterproductive. Ultimately, good programs should be focused on problem solving and identifying underlying causes of criminal behavior and seeking to address those.
Yeah, I would just add that, to follow up on SB, the Cosa model certainly is really adept at using, techniques like motivational interviewing, so that the core member is at the heart of the solution to whatever problems might be presented. Nobody in the room is the expert on fixing the core member's life, and that defining success and how we define that is really critical to moving programs like this forward. So while Cosa has been shown to reduce recidivism in the state of Vermont, there are also instances where our core members have been returned to incarceration, and those things that were discovered may have prevented more victims. So a typical situation that might count in the numbers category as an unsuccessful Cosa because the core member was returned to incarceration, in a more qualitative study might be considered a success because there was no more harm caused.
Thank you. Another question that's been asked several times and was brought up in some of your explanations is how do we actually choose people to participate in these programs? If, as SB and Adam were chronicling, there was a time when we provided more of these programs for folks that had been convicted of committing a violent crime, and then it disappeared, and then it came back. How are we selecting, and also how does Vermont select individuals to participate in this? You know, what criteria does the state use to say this person would benefit from this, or this person is worthy of this thing, or whatever the modicum of judgment that the state uses?
Well, I know that Wisconsin has a receiving institution where individuals go through a number of evaluations to determine what their needs are, whether they're educational, social, cultural, cognitive, and that person is placed upon a list before they are given the treatment that they need. Treatment is not the only answer. I don't think there is a one answer to correcting the problem, but it is a start. And certain programs are necessary and required. However, for restorative justice, I believe it has to be on a volunteer basis. That individual has to recognize within themselves that they want something different, or they want to change, for lack of wording, and seeks that out. And there has to be a screening process, I believe, in order to screen those who are doing it for the correct reasons and those who are doing it just because it guarantees them something throughout their incarceration. And I think some of the people who are in daily contact, administrators, correctional officers, social workers, etc., with individuals, have a clear understanding as to who that person is and will that person be suitable for such a treatment program. That's a way.
I'd like to continue and build off of what SB was just saying and my previous comments on utilizing a peer model. It was my experience that individuals such as myself who were serving exceptionally long terms were looking for a sense of purpose, a way to contribute. That's an invaluable resource that we have within our system that is the unfortunate result of those overly harsh mandatory minimum sentencing schemes, the long sentences that we've seen. But again, this is a resource that we can tap into and actually increase the efficacy of all of the programs in their delivery, because you have a credible messenger. You have someone who is purpose-driven to contribute, to give back, such as myself. I didn't want to see the next generation go through the same traumatic experiences I went through coming through the system. So I had to be proactive and take advantage of the skills, the training that was afforded to me so that I could help my incarcerated community. And in doing so, we transformed the entire environment. That's the key component here, where it becomes not just a singular program that is responsible, it becomes a community, a group of connected individuals who are fully committed to doing better and supporting one another in the process of becoming better, which, from my understanding of the circles, restorative justice as a whole, that's what's at the core of it, that we want to be able to welcome people back into the fold. So we need to create communities with that same mindset, that same level of acceptance. That begins on the inside. That's not something that we should wait, prolong, put off until later. We have the resources, the human resources to do it. We have the knowledge, and I would encourage those persons who have the authority to support those models and to encourage implementing those.
The on the participation point, who's in the programs, the comments of Adam and SB are great, and I think that they are especially pertinent to programming in institutions. I'll just speak briefly to an important point about programming in the community. Particularly for people who are getting non-incarceration sentences. A point that's often not appreciated. It's often thought that these programming resources in the community should go to the people who are first-time offenders, low-risk offenders, to stop them from heading down the path of becoming more serious offenders. But actually the research shows that the benefits you get from community-based rehabilitative programming are with the higher risk individuals. The people who are low risk to begin with really show very little benefit from programming. And in fact, when you put low risk individuals into programming, there's some evidence that you can make risk worse because you're really disrupting their lives in significant ways, and often putting them in group environments where they're surrounded by other individuals who are experiencing a lot of difficulties in their lives. So the research says that traditionally, based on traditional practices, we've been sort of doing things in reverse with our rehabilitative programming in the community. We should be giving it to higher risk individuals rather than the first-time offenders and the low risk individuals.
As for Cosa in Vermont and who sort of gets in and who doesn't, we start with a sort of a referral process that's a team effort between the facility caseworker and the probation and parole office on the outside. And they're frequently going through the lists of folks who are preparing for reentry, 6 and 7 months out, and looking primarily at moderate to high risk offenders and folks who have been incarcerated for a long period of time or are really lacking in community supports. So high needs and high risk are who we're primarily looking at to offer a COSA to. And from there, it's up to the person to decide whether or not they want to participate in COSA. So they're given as much of an understanding as you can have about the program, and it's up to them to decide whether or not they want to participate in it. And we have really, with the exception of only a couple of communities, we have capacity. So there are very few instances where somebody wants a COSA and is not given one. We've also provided a COSA for people more than once. So somebody may have participated in COSA and even completed a full year, and possibly years down the road, they've been reincarcerated and would like another bite of the apple. And if it's appropriate, then that's fine too. So, yeah.
And Secretary Carr, could you add to that the perspective of the Department of Corrections?
Sure. Building off of what SB and Adam, what they were talking about earlier, when people enter the Department of Corrections, they are a risk and needs assessment is performed that determines the areas of risk and need, and where there is programming that can be afforded to those individuals. We provide it. Undoubtedly and honestly, there is a long waiting list for those programs. We just simply don't have enough resources in our facilities to meet the demand for those programs. And as Michael was talking about earlier, the programs tend to be more focused on people who are classified at the medium level in our system, and as they matriculate through the process, they may go from one classification to another, being a maximum security individual to a medium down to a minimum. And as they reach the minimum level and are in our minimum security facilities and are afforded access to the community for work release and other programs and things, you know, those are all based on a plan that is developed by the Department of Corrections with the individual social worker. And of course, as we transition those people into the community, it's coordinated with whoever their probation or parole agent is. So that's generally, you know, how that is done at Wisconsin DOC.
Thank you. For every question that is answered, we're getting maybe another 5 questions, and I know we can talk about this for hours. I do want to provide an opportunity for just putting out 2 quick things. There are questions about restorative justice and recidivism with juveniles specifically. There are questions about still who is selected, what happens to folks who were sentenced under the old law and whether or not these programs are applied to them. But one of the big questions we're seeing in multiple iterations, and I know that this is an obstacle for our local communities. Also, there are questions on whether or not these programs are best suited from the community or community partners, non-DOC and non-corrections as implied by SB, or for folks the whole step of the way. Is it a part of pre-sentencing, sentencing? Is it part of what happens to people who are incarcerated and then afterwards? And there are also questions about what is the percentage of people that have an opportunity to take these programs, and who selects which programs are advantageous, and who even trains the people administering these programs. But what I would like to take a look at, Karen, because you're in a smaller state, the population of your entire state is about the population of just the city of Milwaukee. And I say this as somebody that grew up in Brooklyn and Queens. It's not a, you know, it's a very interesting, almost an experiment for us that we might be able to look at aspirationally based on how that's applied. A question is, how were you able to work with your community and legislators to get them to cooperate on such a level? Because certainly, I'm sure it's been Secretary Carr's instance working with our state legislature, who is very much a tough on crime, very much backpedals and institutes very harsh, restrictive things. As well as, you know, we have 72 different counties, and many of these seem to be at the caprice of whatever county government is exploring how they do these things. I'm hoping you could share with us a little bit of that.
Yeah, well, I would say that we started out in a really fortunate circumstance where a lot of the decision makers within Department of Corrections and our legislature back in the mid 2008, 2009, when we were looking at these things, we had a political and personal environment that was amenable to initiating them. And I'm not going to pretend that we haven't had ebbs and flows in politics and personalities regionally and statewide through elections that have either helped us move this ball forward or have sort of put it in a little bit of stasis. But over time, the trajectory has been to embrace and implement restorative processes more and more. We actually have restorative justice in state statute as a legislative mandate in the state of Vermont. It doesn't have a lot of teeth. That's a bit aspirational, but it's there. It's provided for the state's attorney's offices to use restorative justice and panel processes with the community justice centers. And so it's really available at every level of intervention within the criminal justice system for somebody to sort of take a little off-road into the restorative justice system. And sometimes it's simultaneous, sometimes it's parallel, sometimes it's instead of, but it's really accessible almost no matter where you are. So that's been really helpful in bringing this into the state. The other thing that can't be understated is the power of the people in the state of Vermont. It's not possible to run a program like this without a really robust group of civic-minded folks. So to be able to find 3 or 4 community volunteers to sort of staff each one of these COSAs has been remarkable and really, really touching, and also speaks to the ability of the reentry coordinators to connect in their communities and spread the word and recruit and engage people in this program in order to build safety in their towns and communities. So I think I answered your question, but if there's more to it, let me know.
I bet there will be more to it, but thank you so much. We are coming to the close of our time. It's 1:26, and I really want to thank all of you distinguished panelists and speaker, Professor Michael O'Hare, for joining us. We've heard incredible and acutely depressing things here today. We obviously have more questions we can answer at the moment, and Professor Mike Carriere, my co-moderator, and I are saving all of these questions, all the questions being asked of us on Facebook as well. This way we can centralize them and share them with you. You know, we have a lot to digest, and we're going to continue examining these issues and possible solutions. This is really only the first of our 4 forays into examining how restorative justice and circle keeping can be implemented to break these incredible cycles of violence. I will put the link in the chat again, or perhaps Professor Carriere can do that, whereby you can register for the other webinars. Next week's is 2 hours, and the subsequent ones will be an hour and a half, just like this one. We invite you to join us next week at noon, when we're joined by author Danielle Sered, founder and director of Common Justice and former program director of the Vera Institute, who will discuss solutions to violence that can help transform the lives of those harmed and also foster racial equality. She authored the book Until We Reckon: Violence, Mass Incarceration, and the Road to Repair. That, like Professor O'Hare's book, are both available for us locally at Boswell Books. And the speakers and panelists who are going to discuss these possible alternatives in Wisconsin next week include Milwaukee County District Attorney John Chisholm, Dane County Community Restorative Court Coordinator Ron Johnson, joined by his colleague Danetta Fox, Executive Director of the Community and Reentry Fellow Masters of Sustainable Peace Building Shannon Ross, ACLU of Wisconsin Campaign Manager for Smart Justice Sean Wilson, and founder and CEO of the Alma Center, Terry Strodoff. Also, you will, of course, be joined again by me, Emilio from the Milwaukee Turners, and my friend and co-moderator, Associate Professor Mike Carriere from Milwaukee School of Engineering. I thank you so much. We've got a lot to think about, and certainly a lot of broken things we need to address. Thank you again, Professor O'Hare. Thank you, Secretary Carr, Adam Clausen, SB Crosley, Karen Holmes, and Professor Mike. Thank you. And thank you, attendees. I hope to see you here shortly. To answer the question, yes, this has been recorded. We'll share it on YouTube so that you can see it. And we will also create a body where we share all of the questions and comments. I apologize to all of you that I couldn't answer them all. They're very important. Have a great day. Stay safe out there.